Hi guys, it's Leandra here from PaperArtsy, and this is another video. Today I'm going to show you some ideas using Grunge Paste. I'm really keen to tint Grunge Paste with the various paint colours. So at the moment I'm thinking I want some greeny brown shades for twigs and then some slightly more colourful bluey orangey shades for the birds. This is a Stencil Girl stencil, and what I've done is taped it onto what I call a canvas board. These boards are, it's just like a sort of a heavy chipboard that's coated with gessoed canvas. The size of this one is about 14 inches by roughly 10, which if you're centimetres, that's going to be about 35 centimetres by 25. So it's quite a nice size canvas, larger than an A4. So I've taken the canvas and I've just rubbed some light shades of fresco on there. When I'm making my base coats, I quite like to use opaque shades, so I've mixed snowflake in with other warm tone shades, a bit of guacamole, a bit of pumpkin soup, and even though pumpkin soup is one of our translucent shades, if you mix it in with your snowflake, then of course you're going to turn it into a nice opaque base coat, which is really good. It's much better to build your base coats with your opaques rather than your translucents, but it's nice to know you can also make the translucents opaque with something like snowflake. Then I've just taken some washi tape and use this to stick down the stencil. Normally I don't bother taping my stencils down, but obviously there's quite a lot of detail in here and it is going to take me some time to fill this with the grunge paste. So I've also masked off a few areas where perhaps there's, you know, some birds that I don't really necessarily want, or some branch that continues on and I want to stop it from continuing. So I've just sort of masked a few extra areas of the stencil off. And this also allows me to have extra stickiness in other areas so that the stencil isn't going to lift. Now I'm using the grunge paste and I'm kind of keen to mix up a few batches of colours and apply them through the stencil, and I'm going to experiment a bit whether I might use a palette knife and sometimes I might use a damp brush to apply the grunge paste. And I'm really wanting the birds to be a slightly different colour to the branches and the twigs. So it's one of those jobs that's going to take a while to do, but I think the end result will be quite nice, because rather than just having the whole stencil done in one colour of texture, I'm going to try and build up different colours, make the branches look a bit more interesting by having different shades of green and a bit of brown coming through, and then hopefully the birds will really pop because they'll be in a different colour again to everything else. So that's the aim. So these are two new colours, Lake Wanaka and Space Cadet, two of our lovely grey blue colours, and I'm a real fan of ochre and blue, so I'm going to put some ochre there, and I'm just going to put some grunge paste down, and let's see how we do this. So it's just a matter when you're mixing grunge paste and paint. Actually, I probably have way too much paint there. Let's just leave that over there. But I'm also aware that this is going to take some time. So if I make it a bit wetter than I normally would, then it allows my open time to be a little bit longer. This grunge paste hasn't got any pigment in it, so it means it's quite easy to tint it. And palette knife's ideal for this. And then you can just even mix custom colours if you like. Remember, you need to keep the lid on your grunge paste. It is a fast drying product, so you don't want it to leave it with the lid off because it will just dry out quite quickly. Just want it to be a little bit darker than what it is, so I'm going to add a drop of cinnamon. And put a little bit more pumpkin soup at this end. Okay, so it's just a matter of starting to apply this onto the birds. So I'm going to start with the spatula and see how that goes. And then I'm thinking that the brush, just a little damp brush, will be good to sort of get it in the places that I want to have it. Plus, of course, you can add your texture to it. Okay, so that's my blobby birds all done. Next step is to come over and apply some colours to the twigs and the branches using greens and browns. Then we can lift off the stencil. Okay, so I've got the grunge paste on there as you just saw me do, and I've now mixed up a couple of other colours of paint, which has probably taken me 3 or 4 minutes. So the grunge paste here is starting to sort of dry quite quickly, and what I want to do is just come back over the top and smooth it off a little bit. So I'm coming, and it creates quite a nice mix of colours and texture, and it's levelling that grunge paste down sort of more towards the level of the stencil as well. It's nice because as it's sort of a little bit dry, you get an interesting texture at the same time. Now the cool thing about this is, of course, you can always come back and add more colours if you want, different areas. But I just love this when it grabs like that and you kind of get this really cool texture and the different colours coming through. That's what I quite like. Okay, now next step is doing these branchy bits. So I'm just going to start with some colours, and I'm going to do kind of with one colour at a time. So this is tinned peas, and it's quite nice mixed with the grunge paste because it's a lighter green. And so if I just randomly apply some of this, then you kind of get a balance where you're going with it, because you can sort of see where, just dealing with one colour at a time, you're more in control of how you balance it. And this is kind of easier because your birds have already filled up their paste if some places in the stencil. So if you go over the top of the birds with the green, doesn't really matter, but if it bothers you, of course, we're always going to be able to wipe it off or sand it back later. So you don't have to worry too much about getting some of this colour on the birds. Right, so I can sort of see how the lighter areas of this are building up now. Okay, let's come in with a bit of this browny shade. Sometimes with darker colours like this, you might want to have them just at the edges of your piece so that you're controlling the colour. But don't forget, you can easily come over the top with other colours. So if that, for example, is too dark, then you can just take some of this lighter pumpkin soup mix and blend it backwards, and that will soften it back again. Okay, then this last batch of colour here, I've taken Grunge Paste and mixed it with green olives and holly to get a darker green than the tinned peas. So the next step is just to lift off the stencil and then dry it. That allows you to see a bit better the effect. And now what I want to do is dry this really thoroughly, and then I'm going to come over it with a sanding block just to sort of knock back and make sure those birds are looking a bit more blue. Okay, so now I've dried that thoroughly with the heat gun, and just if it feels cold to the touch, sections of this, then you'll know that you haven't quite dried your grunge paste properly. So make sure that that is thoroughly dry. Then you can take your sanding block and you can use it to smooth back some of these areas. And because we've tinted the grunge paste, you know that the colour is solid the whole way through. So even by sanding, you're still going to see some of your images there. Now, my aim by sanding is usually that I want to perhaps stamp something over the top, or, you know, if we had some little grasses that we stamped along here, then sanding back is a really good idea. It also smooths the layers and it smooths back your grunge paste, so it looks a bit more blended with the background. Right, now what you need to do, because you've got a lot of dust on here, you can either sort of brush it off. I like to get rid of the excess, right, and then take a damp baby wipe and come over the top with it. And see how it just all pops out again, the colour, once you get rid of all that dust. So you don't, it's a bit ridiculous to sand it too far, because you've created that texture for a reason with your grunge paste. Otherwise we could have just used paint without grunge paste to achieve that, but part of this is to have the texture there. So I do like sanding it because it blends through, and sometimes you get unexpected surprises of the colours underneath. But it also, if you're planning on adding stamped layers to your work, then it's a really good idea, because sanding it back allows you to stamp images around it or through it, texture, script, something like that, and you're not going to have a massive lump to overcome as a hurdle. So it's just a matter of getting it how you want it to look. But this is just a starting point for me to perhaps come along and add something else. Obviously needs to come over here, and I'd probably continue to build up some of the layers. Now I did start with a painted background so that it's not just all sitting on a really stark white layer. If you want to add more paint to this, of course you can. And this is where your translucent paints come in. So if you take something like pumpkin soup, then the easiest thing is to perhaps put a little bit of that onto a baby wipe and rub that in, and then just gently start to build up your layers with your pumpkin soup. So you can put it on and then dab at it. So there's plenty of ways to further enhance the work that you're doing, but this is where the translucence is superb, because rather than adding an opaque layer over the top, you can build oomph and depth using a baby wipe and your translucent paints. If you've got a colour that you really want to use that isn't translucent, say something like mermaid, then you can mix it with gloss glaze and make it more translucent. So you've got that glaze layer, and then again use a baby wipe to apply it. You could apply this directly with a baby wipe on here, or but I would probably notch up and go to Beach Hut, which of course is a translucent, and then just use your baby wipe to apply as much, just a tiny bit, and knock it back that way. Okay, so I hope that you enjoy that technique. The technique really is tinting your grunge paste, applying it through a stencil, and then sanding it back to reveal, but sanding it back in such a way that you're not going to, you get to see all the different colours that you've layered on coming through. And that is one of the things that makes grunge paste a unique product as far as a texture paste goes, is that you can tint it easily and you can sand it very easily. Okay, thanks for joining us, and I hope you have fun playing with this technique. Don't forget, if you do, there's a place you can link your work to our blog. Every week we have weekly challenges, so we'd love to see what you do with this technique.